Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the This Week in Coworking podcast feed. I am your host, Hector Kolonas, and today I am joined by guest co host, William Edmundson. William, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Hector. Great to see you as always. Glad to be on This Week in Coworking.
Great to have you back here, and thanks again for sponsoring this week's newsletter. Before we get into some of the fantastic resources you shared this week, what we could discuss in this week's episode is looking a little bit at how to increase your rates without upsetting your members, whether this specific resource type is the most on-demand or in-demand on-demand resource, talk a little bit about what we're seeing at post offices around the world, and then just summarize some pretty interesting this week in co-working metadata before we say goodbye and sayonara until next year. So, William, shall we jump in with iPostal One's resource this week?
Sounds great. Let's go.
Fantastic. So this week, the team at iPostal One put together a pretty robust, I'm going to call it stress reducing resource. So at the end of the year, everyone's trying to figure out what they're supposed to have done this year and what they're thinking about having to do next year. On a lot of operators' minds is compliance, mailroom management, all of that stuff. The resource you shared is actually a guide that includes how to get verified as a CMRA, some pro tips for working with your postmaster. They are human beings and there are ways to interact with them in a language that they understand. How to fill out both the, I think it's 1583 and the 1583A forms. Is
Correct.
that correct?
Yes,
Oh,
sir.
see, I'm getting it. I'm getting it. I still don't know how to do the form, but that's what the guide is for. But you also give some information around setting up that BCG, BCG accounts and what goes into that. But there are also two additional resources that you've listed in this guide that are for iPostal One partners. Everything we've discussed so far is available for anyone. Anyone can go and
Absolutely.
learn, read, but there are two resources in there, the iPostal One CMRA Support Program and the iPostal One Compliance Center. Let's start with the support program. What do iPostal One partners get in the CMRA Support Program?
Yeah, so it's really a good thing, Hector. Everybody who is a CMRA has been through just a gauntlet over the last couple of years, and it really took a lot of operators' eye off the ball of their core business because they had to go to the post office 20 times.
Yep.
That's part of why we formed COMRA, the CMRA Association. But at iPostal One, there are a lot of things we wanted to do um, just to make life, just anything that makes life easier, I'm all for, right? So you mentioned the guides and things that we've put out. We welcome anyone to go see those, click through the link on This Week in Coworking, or go to ipostal1workspace.com under resources.
So tell me a little bit more about what is in the CMRA support program. Is that like a peer support group? Is there a way to interact with other CMRAs?
Yeah, so the iPostal One support is really about us helping our partners um, become compliant. Sometimes there are issues with the postmaster, sometimes there are issues in understanding what to do. Frankly, sometimes it's talking people off the edge of the building. I spoke with several operators at GWA at the big conference, and their attitude was, my postmaster doesn't get it, so I've given up. I'm just not going
Mhm.
to do it. Well, I don't advise that. We can walk through what the consequences of that are.
Yep.
In supporting folks, it's really helping them get over the goal line. It's helping them where there are issues. And there are a lot of things on the forms.
Mhm.
This was taking an outdated paper-based system and digitizing it. Well, if a business had done it, they'd have gone back and said, what do people want? What do people need? And built the system around it. But they digitized something out of date. So it's talking about the different boxes on the form, like the
Mhm.
box 6 has been popular in discussion, but different things come up. And we really do provide support there. Um, we all know that failing to stay compliant can damage your revenue and your reputation. We try to be there and help people along the way.
Love that. So there's also another kind of hidden benefit that you mentioned in this week's newsletter, and that is the iPostal One Compliance Center. I
Yeah,
believe this is a more unified view, a new platform or interface that you're giving to your partners. What does an iPostal One partner get in the compliance center?
They get everything I would want if I were still an operator or multi-unit operator. And really, the whole point of the compliance center is to take the load off of the operator. This is for iPostal One customers. And we do things that are very important. It's uploading the docs. We have an API and the ability to upload way faster than an operator can. And for a minimal fee, we're uploading stuff that would take at least 20 minutes at a workspace. And we all know that people don't go uninterrupted at a workspace. So
Yeah.
that's the best money you could spend. We also track the expiring IDs. So uploading docs, track expiring IDs, and we flag accounts that need attention.
Yep.
Because I was on the CMRA webinar yesterday with Carl Swanson, and one of the things that he and I spoke about outside of the call was that according to the domestic mail manual, they can stop your mail after 30 days of noncompliance. Now,
Mm.
Carl has been reasonable and he's given people a second and sometimes a third chance if you're making an effort, if there's forward momentum. But the fact is it could be a 30-day window if they wanted. And there are local postmasters who play a little harder on the rules. If 30% of your top line revenue at a workspace is coming from being able to receive mail for other people, having that stop is catastrophic.
Yeah, absolutely. You actually bring up a very valid point because a lot of people think of compliance as kind of a when you onboard the customer, it's once and done. But there's actually a bit of a recurring thought there, right? It's not only about making sure they're updated, but making sure whenever their company documents change, whenever their passport or ID gets renewed, whenever any of those triggers happen, you have to kind of resubmit. But a
Yeah.
lot of folks don't track all of that. How can you securely track? I mean, I've spoken to operators where they have photocopies in a locked cabinet of the passports, and how are you supposed to track that for chasing up on expiries? So digitizing that makes a lot of sense. And obviously, because iPostal One is the size that it is, you're storing it in a secure way as opposed to just having everybody's passports in a Dropbox folder, right? Or in an Excel sheet that 30 people have access to.
Right.
We've seen all of these things before, so it makes a lot of sense to have that all in one place. Before we jump into the news, you did mention that you were an operator for a very long time, especially a multi-location operator. And that's the first story I want to pick up and discuss with you from this week's newsletter. For folks who are listening in or watching this wherever you are, if you want to follow along, head to thisweekincoworking.com, click on week 50. Let's dive in with one of the biggest conundrums that a lot of operators face, especially community-focused operators, and that is how do you raise your prices? We shared a piece from Mark Mendel over at Office Evolution Coral Springs detailing how they increase their prices. But William, you've done this several times in the past. You've had to increase your prices. You've been in this game for a healthy amount of time. How do you think about raising prices and communicating that in a way where customers see more value or perceive more value as opposed to, oh, now that you have me, you're trying to increase my pricing?
Yeah. People don't like their prices to be increased, right? Even though they may increase rates in their business. So, one of the things I think is most important as an operator, and this is something I learned in the hospitality industry, is don't wait till it's time for renewal. Be friendly with your members. Go that extra mile for them. If you're doing that all the time, they're not going to want to leave, right? If you have community events where they're meeting the other members, it's sticky. They're not going to want to leave. So if you're doing those things all along, you're thinking about service, hospitality, and responsiveness, it makes it a whole lot easier. If you add a feature or benefit, we have some people adding iWorkspace Mail, which allows you to use the technology of iPostal One for your own members. Talk about it and let people know, hey, we've added this as a service to you. If you add other things in your center or go the extra mile on things, let them know, not in a bragging way, but in a, hey, we're here for you kind of way. We're the extension of your team. They really like that. So being transparent along the way is really great. But I like what Mark was saying, although a lot of people want to wait till the last minute so your members are pinned in. It's good to give them a little bit of a heads up for two reasons. One, if your occupancy is good and they're going to leave, you've got a little bit of time to backfill it, particularly if you
Hmm.
have some people on a waiting list.
Yep.
I was talking to Lucid, and there's some people that might offer to give them a box because they can get considerably more from the next guy. I mean, you
Hmm.
don't want to look at everything that way, so
Yep.
be it. Price value is so important. For the
Yep.
price, this is what you can expect. And a line I used to like is that, um, you know, having this rate increase allows us to maintain the high standards that we offer you and the service that you've come to expect from
Hmm.
XYZ location. And that's the service, it's our hospitality, it's responsiveness, it's keeping things clean, it's keeping everything up to
Yep.
date. And sometimes I'll hear people I used to hear people say, well, but that's this much money. And if you break it down to, well, gee, Bob, that's only this much a month, and you're established and we feel like part of your team.
Yep.
But we need to maintain our profitability or we won't be here for you.
Yep. I
And
mean,
then
that's
they think
absolutely, it's a
about it.
really good way to position it.
Yeah, and gee, I wish my landlord didn't give me increases, but that's how it is. And Bob,
Yep.
don't you put increases in periodically to your customers?
Yeah.
They understand when you explain it that way.
Yeah, I mean, that actually brings up another very valid point is who should be having these conversations, right? Increasingly, we're seeing, especially in multi-location teams, is the person who did the initial sale, the sales team or the sales lead knows this language. They know value propositions. They know how to kind of quantify and validate the value and the demand and what the feelings are. But oftentimes, at least from what I'm seeing across the global network that I work with, is it falls on the community manager to do the renewal. And these people are not normally equipped. These are the friendly faces, right? These are the people who are
Yeah.
there to make their lives easier. So it kind of counterintuitively is not the right person to do the renewal, because especially if you're increasing, especially if you're mid-market or increasing rates, you want that friendly face to be the good cop in the situation. But it's just a fascinating thing that everyone's like, oh yeah, let the community manager do it, they have the best rapport, but they're probably not the best equipped to break down the business side of, this is an expense your business pays, it pays my salary to be here. I think a lot of operators should separate it, or do you disagree with that?
I think yes and no. And part of it depends on how is your center staffed. There are a lot of centers that just have one person, so that that solves
That
that.
is a sales.
Then there are some centers, some of our partners have maybe the center manager and two other folks. Um, I think an important thing, Hector, is knowing your members. I
Mhm.
mean, they're the slam dunk guys. That can be done pretty easily. Hey, Bob, I'm dropping off the renewal. I'd love to stop by and pick it up later today.
Yeah.
If everything's cool with Bob, that may be an easy way. It's not making him think too much.
Yeah.
Then if there's an objection like, gee, you raised me 5%. Well, gosh, Bob, our landlord raises us, and the things we talked
Yeah.
about earlier. Um, I think that if you're going to use a person who is not in contact with the member all the time, you need to change your formula. You
Hmm.
need to make that person familiar with the member and
Yeah.
have that rapport. A lot of people fall back to the center manager, in which case
Yeah.
I would make sure they know how to answer everything
Yeah.
and they can overcome those objections because really it's a great value proposition. And if they were to go somewhere else, they wouldn't get what they're getting from you.
Yeah. I also think it's a very valuable skill set to train the entire team on. Objection
100%.
handling, upselling, all of those things. So we're seeing also on the same side, we're seeing a lot of community managers upselling Wi-Fi, upselling mailboxes, upselling these things that ordinarily are left to a sales team or an initial sales process, whereas it's just leaving money on the table, even if
Well,
it
and
doesn't feel salesy.
it's no different than good operators have everyone in their team knowledgeable on how to give a tour. Because if somebody pops in unexpected, you need to be able to give the tour,
Mhm.
etc.
Yep. I completely agree with that. And I completely agree as well on your point that if you randomly got a contract from accounting at, like that's going to immediately cause a recoil, right? As opposed to, hey,
Absolutely.
we just dropped it. Have a look. Let me know if you have any questions. It's going to be a much friendlier increase process.
Yeah,
Um, it does bring up a lot of questions around the commoditization of co-working, right? If anyone can go to any space and they get the exact same service, desk and Wi-Fi, if you find yourself in that boat, you have another whole conundrum of things you have to think about. But it does lead us into the next story. And this is a piece that Frank Cottle shared over on allspace.org, looking at some data out of both Workday and Savills. For folks who don't know, Savills owns Workday, it's their Flex division and their booking platform. But the interesting data is that they reported that the number one requested feature slash amenity slash product is meeting rooms, which is probably surprising to folks who maybe are not in the co-working spaces every day. A lot of folks used to think, it's the day passes, it's the lounge access, it's the free coffee that people are coming in for, but people want essentially day offices. They say meeting rooms, but from what I've seen, it's essentially day offices. They want somewhere where
sure.
they and their team can come together for a set number of hours, for a set number of days, or a set days per week, and collectively work in a private space that they don't have to worry about the office cleaning, the setting up, the fit outs, the monthly thing. They just want to be able to have on demand offices. It just
Sure.
happens to look like meeting rooms right now. Are you seeing similar trends from where you're sitting?
Yeah, absolutely. I talk to operators every single day, and I love that because I get to hear what they're seeing, what they're feeling. Meeting rooms used to be huge, and then we had this little thing called COVID, and it struggled to come back, but it's back stronger than ever. And what I'm hearing from operators is that they're getting smarter as a result of more demand. They're using thinking that they hadn't used before, like how do they optimize their meeting rooms? Before, you used to ask an operator, do you have enough meeting rooms? And they go, well, no. And you say, well, tell me why. And well, sometimes people want meeting rooms at the same time. Well, in fact, if you had two less meeting rooms, your members would just pick a time that was available. Now you actually are starting to have a problem with actual availability at any time of the day.
Hmm.
And you're seeing things like FlexSpace AI come out and take advantage of monetizing that demand and better utilizing it. And
Yep.
I think that you wouldn't be able to do that. I come from the hotel industry. Christmas Correa comes from, Expedia in the hotel industry. And we saw that because we got to use that revenue management in hotels. And you could not do that and workspaces if it weren't for the increased demand. I think also as operators, instead of the meeting room being, a hassle, oh, now I got to clean it and straighten the chairs and, all of that, people are looking at it like, hey, I'm going to have a referral program for my members if they send other meetings here. I'm going to give
Hmm.
somebody a free deposition if they'll bring their next deposition here. And there are other things, but we're really getting smarter about using that as a product and a service. And
Yes.
I think that's reflected in all of those numbers in the US and abroad.
Yep. I completely agree. And it's just really interesting because we're seeing it as a very much an on-demand hook. So people are looking for a meeting room for a specific thing. But it goes back to that intrinsic skill to upsell, where a lot of teams are now adding in subscriptions for meeting room access. So yes, you've come in twice, you've come in three times. But hey, did you know that we have a meeting room subscription, which gets you priority access to the meeting rooms? But you also pay a lower rate and you get a free, every fifth meeting room is free. And
Yeah,
tying in that revenue that would have potentially spread between multiple operators is just a really good business tactic. And if you are seeing that meeting room demand and you have got repeat customers and you have got the data and you have got a team that can upsell, then putting the pieces together unlocks a whole new source of revenue.
absolutely. And Hector, with the iWorkspace Mail, which is our platform for your members to have digital mailbox, a lot of operators are bundling meeting room hours and digital mailbox because, if I'm working from home, I don't want that mail coming to my house, or maybe my address is a funny street name or something like that. And maybe I want the privacy where it's not my home address,
Mhm.
but I need that meeting room, not every day, but I need it when I need it. Maybe it's for meeting a client, maybe it's interviewing employees, whatever it may be. And
Yep.
operators are getting much more creative about that. You can
Yep.
bundle it together, build some
Absolutely.
really great packages.
Yep. And I mean, it's also that going back to that being smarter, we're seeing a lot of folks who have an office that's suddenly available, or there's a gap between two people moving in. That is a bookable resource. Make it bookable by the day,
100%.
make it bookable by the hour. Like it's just sitting there otherwise, and this
You,
already
you,
has to be clean.
you're spot on. And I know when I was running a company that we sold to Regis, if there was a vacant office, that became a day office or a meeting room, and we could rearrange furniture or just leave it like it was.
Yep.
But somebody needed that, you know?
Yep. And just leaving it on the balance sheet as you will, or in the inventory system as a unbooked resource is leaving money on the table once again.
100%. I hate
So you
I hate
did,
leaving
yeah, go
money on
for
the
it.
table, Hector.
Don't we all, right? So a lot of people have been trying to figure out how do they make enough revenue, and we're seeing those numbers play out. So definitely, if you have that problem of not enough meeting rooms, but you happen to have offices, just get a little bit creative with how you list those in your inventory system, and then speak to your partners who may have demand to put there temporarily.
Yeah, one little tip on that. Take it out of the aggregator sites as an office, but have it in your own system, your own platform as available as a meeting room, day office, whatever
Correct.
you want. And another tip that I learned when I was doing a project before UFG bought one of their brands is Intelligent Office, as a matter of fact, is I put dual monitors in a couple of the vacant offices. It looked like somebody was using the office, which is always good. But more importantly, those were the first ones to book. So people weren't
Mhm.
booking my big meeting room. They were booking this vacant office that,
Absolutely.
we have a special name on it, paid
Yeah.
more. It was awesome.
I mean, it makes complete sense. I mean, I travel most times with my laptop, but like if you sit in my office where I'm working normally, there's multiple screens, right? You never get to see that side of my room for folks watching on YouTube, but there are a lot of screens there, right? So when I travel, the first thing I look for is can I plug my laptop into multiple screens to at least give me some of the productivity that I have at home? When I'm on the road. So I love that idea. Fantastic tip that you've shared. Take it as a Christmas present to everybody. Put the screens into those empty offices and then put a premium on it. People will
And
pay for access to those
you
good
can try
screens.
it with one, but what I found is that you try it with one, people will show up and they're upset that somebody else booked it.
Yeah, that is true. That is very true. And that's a fantastic problem to have. You did mention, William, a little bit earlier about depositions, right? It's a big use of meeting rooms. You need somewhere private, you need somewhere neutral, you need somewhere quiet, professional to do a lot of legal things that lawyers need to do. There was an article out of Italy this week in Italian, which is always great translating the stuff and, and highlighting the news from around the world about a pretty interesting partnership between, and I'm going to get this wrong for my folks in Italy, the Forense, which is the National Social Security and Assistance Fund for lawyers. What that means is a group of lawyers who do things together and fund their Social Security through a collective effort. They made a partnership with a company called Spazi per l'Italia. Also got that wrong. Apologies to my Italian listeners, which is translated to Spaces for Italy, which is a platform through which you can book day offices, private meeting rooms, workspaces, day passes, etc. What the interesting thing about this story is not that lawyers need co-working space. This should be a given everywhere. In
Absolutely.
fact, it came up as an example that you mentioned, William. So this is not the story. The story is that Spaces for Italy is a network owned and run by the Italian Post Service. The USPS of Italy runs a network. They currently have 50 operating locations. They're expanding that out to 250 locations across their own network that will now be run as on demand or membership based flex space. And it's such a interesting concept. We've seen train stations do this, we've seen banks do this, we've seen coffee shops do this, but a network like a post office doing this, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are keeping their eye on this. Does it work? How does it work? Is it something that generates new revenue? We all know that the post office model wasn't designed for the world we live in today.
Correct.
So my question to you, given that you sit on Comra and you work with a lot of postal things, what do you think? Is this something that the US Postal Service might be watching? Is it something that might be on their radar? Could we start seeing a USPS network of co-working spaces?
Sure. I would tell you that I don't see that happening in the near term. The new postmaster, David Steiner, my discussions with him, he's very entrepreneurial. He's run some very big companies. He was on the board of FedEx. He's a business guy, which is refreshing in a government agency. I think right now they've got their work cut out for them with post offices, and on the blueprint for what's next and what they're trying in post offices is adding some more services with the space that they have, doing kind of a renovation, making it have a more retail feel, things like passport photos and things like that. I don't think that they have the space um, currently or the opportunity to put co-working in now. But as things change, and particularly as their technology changes and their space needs at the local level for the operational side of things, all the
Yeah,
packages and everything, if that changes over time, that could free up space in
yeah,
buildings that they already have or lease. So
yes.
I wouldn't rule it completely out, but I wouldn't can be concerned about it in the near term for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a very valid point and something I hadn't thought about when I initially put the newsletter together, and that is post office is essentially federal property, right? They're federally owned, they're federally run, which means you can't just put anyone in there. Almost everyone has to
Right.
go through a background check. So doing this in a post office right now seems like a very heavy load. But I also think that there's an opportunity there for the right set of entrepreneurs from co-working to go and pitch this to the post service in some way because the post offices can't run the post office and a co-working business, but we've seen it work really well where multifamily operators are partnering up with co-working operators, where strip malls and retail centers are partnering up with co-working operators to do the operational side. So maybe we could start seeing some of these partnerships being piloted, but that federal property thing is the one I think is going to be the biggest hiccup, trying to get people in and out of that building in a secure way without, compromising the mail is another whole question, which we should probably just do another whole podcast just on could this happen and what is the use
Yeah.
case?
Be glad to. Yeah. And we've got a member of our team, heads up our legal department, that travels globally and works with all of the international posts. And it might be interesting to include him in the conversation.
Absolutely. So if you're listening and you want to hear more about that, you want to just hear us all spitballing of how this could work and what the opportunity is, what the risks are, just drop us a comment on Instagram, wherever you're watching this, and just let us know that, hey, you'd be interested in seeing that, and we'll put something together. Thanks for volunteering your colleague into that podcast with us. Before we sign out for today, I just want to share some stats from the newsletter this year. I like to normally at the end of the year share with our partners and our supporting brands some of the numbers that we hit every year. Given that I like to build this week in co-working in public, I'm sharing this now with everybody. In short, we had 270 new teams join the core email list. Great to have you here. Excited to have you as part of the team. As you know, you're listening to this or you're watching this somewhere, we've invested very heavily into multimedia shows this year. We've gathered over 500 hours of people engaging with this content. So glad to see that. Still early days, but fantastic to see those numbers go up. On the website side, we've invested a lot. We put people profiles, company profiles, jobs, events, all the stuff packed into the newsletter so you have one source to go to. We hit triple digit growth for the second year in a row on visits to that site. Just want to thank you all for thanks, William. Thanks for taking part, for letting us be a part of your week, being a part of your business, but also to all the patron brands and all the partners who sponsor this and make it possible for us to make it a free resource for the whole co-working world. We thank you all.
Yeah. And Hector, I just want to thank you on behalf of both iPostal One and Comra. Thank you for all the great work that you do in keeping us all informed on what's going on in the industry. And I really appreciate being able to have these conversations with you.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that we get to kind of go back to the radio days of, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is the conversation. interact with us. So appreciate you supporting us and appreciate your kind words, and also for joining me today. This will be the last weekly recap for the year. Next week's newsletter is going to be what we call the Unwrapped episode this year in co-working, where we're just going to dig into these are the biggest stories you clicked on. These are the biggest things we saw shared. Here's what you watched the most. Here's what you listened to the most. And then we're going into the holidays. So we'll be back with our regular coverage, kicking back in January. So thank you all for listening. William, thanks again for joining me. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you soon.